thank you so much for being here. We have with us today Christina Stadlbauer, Bartaku, and Christian Hens. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for everyone that participates in the meeting as a guest as well. Today we will have the book launch of Christian Hens' latest book, which is called Chance Encounters, Bioethics for a Damaged Planet. So in this book, Christian brings together bioethics and the philosophy of biology to argue that the role of the philosopher in scientific research is ethically necessary, and that it can also improve the quality and coherence of the research in itself, ensuring that concepts employed, be it genes or autism or development, are used consistently and thoughtfully across interdisciplinary projects. She argues in this book that chances and uncertainty play a central role in bioethics, and that we must therefore focus as much as we can on what we know and as on what we create in describing organism and practices and the way that we make the world. As such, this is necessarily an ethical activity in itself. Examining genetic research, biomedical ethics, autism research, and the concept of risk hence illustrates that there is no universal or neutral state of scientific and clinical knowledge, and that attending to the situatedness of individual experience is essential to understand the world around us, to know its and consequently our limitations as well, and to forge an ethical future. So before proceeding, I will briefly introduce our panelists. So first we have, as I mentioned, Christian Hens, who is Professor of Bioethics at the Department of Philosophy in the University of Antwerp. She is PI of the ERC SDG-sponsored project, which is called Neuroepigenetics. She is interested in the ethics and philosophy of developmental condition, reproduction, epigenetics, microbes, precision medicine, and synthetic biology. She has written monographs in the field from experiences of adult following autism diagnosis towards an ethic of autism, which is published by OVP as well. And of course, the one we're here to discuss today, which is Chance Encounters. Also with us, we have Christina Stadlbauer, who is an artist and scientist focused on non-human life forms, this meaning plants, animals, bacteria, mycelium, in an attempt to renegotiate the relations we humans have with our environment. So she's fascinated with the cracks in the ancient craft of Kin Tsugi to repair ceramics with Urushi and gold. Inspired by this same philosophy of this transformative repair, Christina started a transdisciplinary research project called BactoHealing, where healing of ceramic material is attempted through microbiological life forms. She holds a postdoctoral position at the Department of Biotechnology at the University of Ghent and the Center of Ethics at the University of Antwerp. And last but definitely not least, we have Bart Vandeput with us. So Bartaku's statistic research practice plays with separation narratives and manifestations. Often in a transdisciplinary way, it blurs the difference between processes and the result, audience and makers, and ones and the others. Interventions, objects, lectures, labs, and writing can be situated in the field of BioArt, energy art, and experimental intermedia art. In the last decade, the practice has been evolving in close attunement with the rewilding plantation in West Latvia. As a Doctor of Art, is also currently a visiting researcher at the New Energy Technology Group of the School of Sciences at Aalto University in Finland. Well, after this brief introduction, thank you so much again for being here. And for those that have joined us just now, please keep your camera and audio off. This meeting is being recorded, so that way we avoid any interference with the questions and answers. And of course, please feel free to put any questions that you have throughout all the process of the interview on the chat, and I'll be happy to share them with the panelists after in the Q&A section. So yeah, thank you so much. That's enough for me. I will turn now to our author, Christian Hens. So Christian, my first question is, why did you want to write this book? And what was the idea or aim behind it?
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's a bit exciting. I'm a bit nervous, but anyway, this book, I think already a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, I was thinking I would like to write a book on the ethics of epigenetics, which is really a very concrete topic. I had just finished a book then about autism, which was also a very concrete topic, but during the process of writing this autism book, I got to know very different disciplines, very different interesting fields, such as disability studies, such as process philosophy, etc., far beyond my comfort zone. And while writing this autism book, the idea of writing a book about the ethics of new epigenetic knowledge became something else. I thought I thought that rather than just writing again a book of the ethics of something, maybe I just have to, I wanted to write how we should think about ethics, how we should think, especially about bioethics, about how can we actually, and of course, also the state that the world is in now. We are like in a state of emergency, and most of the book was also written during the COVID pandemic. How, as bioethicists, how should we relate to this sense of emergency, to the idea that that it's now or never, that we actually have to do something. So that's one part of it. I started from thinking about something very specific, and then it blew up into talking about everything. To be sometimes I think I put a little bit too much in the book. And as I already said, another reason why I wrote the book as I've written now is because also my idea that as bioethicists we have to do something. We have to also. We have been thinking a lot about genes, about things like designer babies, but we're now, COVID has demonstrated to us that there are really very big, almost, what they call super wicked problems confronting us. And maybe as bioethicists, it's time that we also think about what is the best way to actually, how can bioethicists help with that? So that's the other part of the reason why I wanted to write. I've written the book as it is now. But next to that, they're very different. It's a kind of a mess of reasons why I wrote the book as it is now. And another reason is also, my own, how do you say it, existential crisis, or thinking about what is the role of a bioethicist in specific research projects. As a bioethicist, we often get asked to give some to give ethical advice about autonomy, about consent, about risks, etc., etc., etc. But I was a bit frustrated with that, and I was thinking, maybe we can do more, and maybe we as bioethicists we can also question and keep asking, things about the concepts used in the science, the aims of the science themselves, not only about how the science is done, but also what the science is about and why the science is done. And also this part of the motivation also came a little bit from my engagement in autism research. In autism research, often, things like autism are taken for granted, or the idea that autism is something that needs to be fixed or something are taken for granted. And more and more I became convinced that doing ethics is also questioning these concepts and questioning the aims of these research protocols. So that's a bit that was going on in my head like a big soup. And one of the big motivation of writing this book was getting this soup a little bit more structured and a little bit more in a story that may make sense also for other people. So one of the big motivations was also getting the soup in my head a bit more structured.
Well, thank you so much. That actually matches perfectly with what was my next question. You mentioned that one of the things that motivated you was that thing, just like going beyond and asking how we do, not only the ways we do science, but also asking about science itself in a more meta approach to it. So I think you briefly mentioned it, but do you have any other aspects you would like to highlight when it comes to like how does this book ties in with your career as a bioethicist further?
I wasn't always a bioethicist. I was trained a long time ago as a literary scholar. And in the 90s, I maybe you remember or not, but the discussion in literary studies was all about on the one hand, you had post-structuralism, the language that structures reality. And on the other hand, there was more like science. Science can really demonstrate what it can really find out what is the truth, what is the essence, etc., etc. That's a bit the philosophical background in which I sort of grew up. And it always, during my career, it always caused a little bit of an unease with me, because I really love science. I enjoy science. But on the other hand, if you love something, it also means you have to be critical of it. You have to dare to ask, why are you doing this? For which reason are you using the right concepts, etc., etc. And when I started studying ethics, after having a short career as a computer person, but that's a different story, I started studying bioethics specifically because of a love of science and a love of thinking about science and about how can science be made better and be made relevant, and isn't that what philosophers are about? And as a bioethicist, I started thinking first of all about genes, etc., etc. But then I became a little bit frustrated because I thought that the way we were thinking about genes and about the implication of genetic knowledge and genetic technologies didn't really question the presumptions of science itself. We all assumed that, okay, genes, we can learn a lot from them, we can change them, we can create new people, etc., etc. But whether this is a right way to look at organisms or to look at life or to look at human beings, it seemed like this wasn't the task of bioethicists to question that. And I got a little bit of an existential crisis then. And luckily, I was awarded this ERC, and I could have this really wonderful team of people from diverse backgrounds, also from disability studies, doctors, etc., etc., who then like really opened my eyes that there are very different ways of looking at reality, of looking at science, of looking at how science can function, etc., etc. And I found my foot again as a bioethicist. I had some period where I thought I don't want to be a bioethicist anymore. I want to be an anthropologist or like a philosopher of science. Bioethics is too. Is not what I want to do, because I really want to think about the science itself. And part of this book is actually coming to terms with that kind of struggle within me. I want to sort of, it's a kind of the revenge of the bioethicist, so to say, saying that, okay, well, we can contribute something. We are allowed to think about science. We are allowed to annoy people. We don't annoy scientists. And that's not because we hate them, but it's exactly because we love them, and we love scientists, but we also love the world and everything that's in there. And this must be our goal, to make things better. And that's a bit my history as a bioethicist.
No, thank you so much. That's actually really, really nice to hear. It's good that we kind of like showcase that approach to saying, like, I have a struggle with my field, I have a struggle with what I'm doing, and that actually just, in return, I got this answers and I got this book put together, which is really interesting. And it's actually a much appreciated book here at OVP. And one of the things why we like it so much is because it's a bit transdisciplinary in itself. It does have a bit of a mix, which is really interesting. And it goes from a mere textbook or open access book to a book which has something quite interesting, which is the contribution from this wonderful artists that we have with us today here. So I wanted to ask you, like, what made you go beyond the regular sort of like textbook to something that has artistic contributions, as this is the case with this book?
I'm really very happy that Christina and Bart were willing to think about the artistic contributions, because I think one of the major themes in the book as I was writing it, and this was also a learning process for myself, coming from a very, representationalist view on science and on philosophy and on ethics. We're describing things and the things, and we have to think about the ethics about the things that we describe. Being more and more, reading more and more about things like new materialism, but also process philosophy, also these ideas that the science that we do is not only descriptive, but is also actually creating new worlds. And that made me realize that this is also something that we as bioethicists do. The way we present dilemmas and we present problems, etc., is also actually opening up new possibilities and closing down other possibilities. And that's a creative activity. And I've never thought of myself as really someone who engaged with the arts a lot. I really like books, but I also like horror movies and video games, etc., etc. So I hadn't really thought a lot about arts before until I met Christina in a project on synthetic biology, and I came to realize what an important role arts and thinking about science, but also about concepts, arts can play. And I thought, well, I can write a book and I can argue a lot of things there about making worlds and creativity, but if it's merely text, there is something missing. So, and I loved Christina's way of thinking about life, about other than humans. And she introduced me also to Bart, who also has very interesting ideas about our relation with a more than human world. And well, I think the fact that they wanted to contribute is a very big. I'm very happy with that. I'm really pleased, and I think it would be strange to have a book that's about creativity and about thinking about possible futures that doesn't actually contain what this could look like. So, yeah.
100%. And I think that's what makes this book kind of unique and really nice to actually, everyone who can see the link, just open it and read it, because it's actually a very nice mix of artistic contribution plus the science or questioning science part of it, which is really nice. And my next question actually just ties in with the last one that I made, which is for Bartaku and Christina. So how did you respond to that invitation, to the invitation Christina sent you when it came to the book proposal?
Well, as Christine already mentioned, we met in a context of a project that we are working on together. And it's actually a project between art, science, and philosophy. And our first encounter somehow I was fascinated with what Christine was telling about how her take on philosophy, her take on ethics. So I was fascinated with this. And when she then invited me to participate in this book, I felt very honored. And I felt that this is a super opportunity to give another angle to the work that I have been doing for many years with this BioArt projects, BioArt events, interventions, and somehow, it was very special to be able to put not just a picture of this in the book, but also to very briefly explain what these projects are about.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I can add to this that I think we share with Christine the questioning of reality, looking at what science has to say about this, but also from a grounded way. So we work with scientists, we learn the ecologies of labs, we see how our bodies respond to it, we learn the protocols, we try to find ways to respond to them. And out of all this very transversal process comes our answer to these questions. So we have an artistic research practice. So questioning is key. So we relate very much in that sense to her practice. And I think we can create very interesting constellations together in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. My next question is actually in the process of selection the visual visual complements for the book. How did that work? How did that went about?
I think we got together and went through the draft text of Christine, and then per chapter we found pieces that resonated, and each one of us then made a selection, looked at it together, made a first filtering, let it sink in a bit and re-looked at it and then narrowed down our selections. And then gradually we came to the choice of images, where we also provided captions and we provided a bit of context, like in which part of our research can you situate these images or sketches, whatever they may were. And yeah, we quite easily agreed upon Christina's sketch for the cover of the book. That was the easiest part, actually.
Yeah, maybe I can add, because like Bart said, first we were reading the book, and as I was reading through the chapters, I thought, but this relates to this and this relates to this. And Bart and me, we have gone a long way back, so we know each other's work quite well. So immediately when I was reading the book, I thought, okay, it would be great if Bart could participate in this also, because yeah, the works just relate so much to what is happening. So yeah, by reading already, there were many thoughts or many ideas of what could fit. And then indeed we sat together and we selected. And yeah, some works are from me or from Bart, but there are some examples also where we did a workshop together, for example, around CRISPR-Cas, or yeah, there's one example of a cat that we both relate very much to. So there are some works also that have to do with both of us.
That's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. So my next question is like process of selecting the images. Of course, you mentioned how this image is actually was a thorough process in which you basically went chapter by chapter checking like what kind of visual complement could work in there. But I wanted to ask, what do you think, in your opinion, do these images add as an extra to the written text?
Yeah, I think the written text already is very, I mean, it's theoretical, of course, but there's many examples and it's quite graspable. But I think the images add at different angles. So they of course, the examples that we chose are artistic interventions that are more poetic than logic. They're not so analytical. So they add maybe a kind of maybe they open the mind for people to imagine something else, or maybe for symbolic or metaphoric solutions to some questions, or to ask the question in a different way. So I think they add something that is a bit less structured and more, yeah, speculative or more imaginative or more poetic, I would say.
Yeah, something like a non-linear breath, perhaps we have been adding, at least I hope.
Well, thank you so much. I really like that brief explanation and way of fitting it. So now I will go back to Kristin, if that's fine. So my final question actually is, what research or ideas have you recently encountered after publishing the book that you might be interested in discussing further in future titles? Because we all know, like, once we publish something, we're always like going back and saying like, oh my God, something was just released and I could have added this. So.
Yeah, you're right. You hope you write a book, and then you get rid of the soup in your head, and then a whole lot of new ideas are there, and you feel like you have to either write it again or write a new one. So yeah, since finishing this book, I already encountered a lot of new stuff that I thought was interesting. The book in itself, as I said, it was like describing a bit of the journey to coming to terms with myself as a bioethicist and reclaiming bioethics as like a field that actually also, in terms of pandemics and in terms of global health and environmental crisis, can contribute something valuable. But I use some cases in the book, and I describe some ways in which we can look at specific cases differently, but I don't actually provide a hands-on solution to ethical problems. In fact, I also argue that that's impossible. I use this idea of staying with the trouble of Donna Haraway. The idea that we can fix things by doing ethics right is just not something that will ultimately help us. And that's something that Donna Haraway and thinking about process philosophy, etc., taught me. On the other hand, as a bioethicist, you're also expected to come up with answers. Remember the COVID crisis, all the ethical things that came up about admission to the IC, etc., etc. People ask you, what should I do, etc., etc. So there is this tension between thinking about ethics in a way that is that allows for failure, that allows for uncertainty, that allows for temporalities, etc., etc. on the one hand, and then the task of the applied or bioethicist of coming with actual, with actual propositions, with actual, guidance that people ask for you, because that's also your job. And I think that's the next step. The next step, I think, is thinking even more, trying to come up with ways of thinking about ourselves, about our situation, but also about the more than human world, how we can learn from the more than human world in order to do policies, in order to do certain ameliorative approaches, in order to do things better. So how to do that? How to translate these ideas into actual really hands-on recommendations or policy guidance. I think that's the next challenge that I would like to tackle. And in order to do that, I think what we should do is not continue, of course, the way we have been doing bioethics, using principles and using moral theories, it's still very valid, and it's still, it gives you really, a hold on things on the one hand. On the other hand, I think there is a lot to be learned from thinking human beings not at the center of the universe, but thinking from other than human creatures. And my next project, I hope to be about microbes, about thinking what can we learn from microbes. We sort of neglect them, or we are afraid of them, but in fact they are other than human beings who sort of define us. We have them everywhere in our body. They sort of, define our personalities, etc., etc. But on the other hand, we don't think about them a lot. Maybe there is something to be learned about how we should think about health, how we should think about our responsibility to the environment from looking at things that we usually don't look at. So that's one thing. It's a bit an idea that I have. And of course, Christina and Bart, they are already thinking with microbes. So I hope to continue working with them. On the other hand, what I think is also still missing in the book, and I try to talk a little bit about it in the book, but I think what we need to do more is look beyond Western philosophies. I sort of engaged with process philosophy like Whitehead, etc., in the book. But the more I read from non-Western philosophies, for example, indigenous philosophy from North America, etc., the more I realize that how we think about reality, how we think about our duties towards more than human reality, well, they have other views on that may sort of also enlighten us to do things differently. So I think I need to also think more about that, engage more with non-Western philosophies, with non-Western ways of thinking the entanglements with more than human worlds, and see how this can inspire Western bioethics, how this can inspire Western bioethicists that have to think with governments about policies, etc. That's a huge, will probably be a huge bridge to build, but I think that's a bit the way I want to continue with this work.
Well, that sounds absolutely fascinating and exciting. So I'm really looking forward to your next volume and your next book. And definitely if it has Christina and Bartaku in it, it will be absolutely brilliant as this one has been. So yeah, those were my main questions. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, so if you don't mind, I'm going to throw them at you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So the first question we have, it says, to you, which I believe refer to Christina and Bartaku in my introduction, describe yourself as transdisciplinarians, but the word does not directly appear in the book. How do you think this concept fits into the emergence of new or revived bioethics?
Yeah, shall I? Yeah. I think in my coming to terms with bioethics, I sort of, well, I also teach bioethics courses. And then, of course, we always use this kind of conundrum. Bioethics is interdisciplinary, bioethics is transdisciplinary. But what does it actually mean to be interdisciplinary is a very difficult question. And I think for myself, I sort of decided to just not try to define it anymore, but just to try to live it. Because you know, as a bioethicist, you are constantly asking yourself, am I a philosopher? What am I? Blah, blah, blah. But maybe I also realize that this also takes up a lot of mental space. And I think maybe we should just assume implicitly that what we do makes sense, and that this means actually learning from these different disciplines, but also deploying methodologies from different disciplines, social science, arts, etc. Of course, and yeah, that's for me interdisciplinarity. Not thinking, okay, can I say this because is this really something that I, as a bioethicist, am allowed to say because this is something I took from cultural studies, etc., etc., and vice versa. So I to be honest, I really, for me, defining interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity is, I think it's important to be interdisciplinary, but I think maybe we should stop sort of defending interdisciplinary and just taking it for granted, and taking for granted that everyone has their own specialty, but that these specialties sort of also gradually overlap with other specialties. And that's and I think that's at the heart, that's what I like about being a bioethicist, and that's why I call also bioethicist a bit of a liminal person, a gray person. It's actually also very freeing not to belong to any discipline and just have this general idea of being someone who thinks about the ethics of life. And for me, that it has taken a long time to accept that, but now I think that's this kind of liminal space is somewhere where I feel most comfortable.
Thank you.
I don't know, Christina and Bart, maybe you have something.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you both have anything you would like to add to the question.
Well, what you just said, Christina, I think is very relevant, because indeed it was not always like that all these disciplines were split up. I think before it was just much more fluid and yeah. I mean, if we think of old masters, or I don't know, they were not just one thing. They were scientists and artists and doctors. I mean, they were everything at the same time. So indeed, and I think also the world around us is not split into such categories. So I think indeed trying to live a bit more, allowing these borders to dissolve or to fluidly flow into each other. I think this is a very good practice, and this might change a way of thinking and might also change the people that we have to do.
Yes, we are very much thinking in terms of the two cultures. On the one hand, you have creativity, you have the humanities. On the other hand, you have the exact science, which is about representing the real underlying reality or whatever. And from I think if you start from a process philosophy or an indigenous Northern American philosophy point of view, this just doesn't make sense. And the nice thing is, I think that many of the scientists that I read for the book, like Stuart Kaufman, etc., they also don't assume these kind of boundaries. They also don't assume that science is merely looking at things and describing it, and art is and being creative.
I could maybe add something from own practice. I tend to speak only from real, true transdisciplinarity in my own work when I notice that in the process, the proceedings of each discipline, that they start to change, and that there's also a willingness to have these protocols or being changed, and also that the entities in the ecosystem that you create with your work, that the entities themselves transform. I think art in the end is about transformation. Well, if in your process of workings, if the entities involved transform and the methods transform, I think then you can speak, then you're allowed, I think, to speak about a transdisciplinary process. That's a bit my view that evolved over time.
Well, thank you so much. Curiously enough, I know that we're trying to break boundaries. The next question that we have in the chat talks a bit about this kind of etymological boundaries or etymological approach to the concept of bioethicism. So the question reads, Fritz Jaar was actually probably the first to use the word bioethics, and like Potter in a broader context of relationships to nature. What do you think the current state of the American-European tension about the birth of the word bioethics is kind of represented now?
Yeah, also there I encountered Van Rensselaer Potter many years ago when I took over a bioethics course from someone else, and there his ideas of having this kind of biological bioethics are really an ethics of life, etc., was sort of presented as being very naive. Like, okay, no, this is not what ethics is about. Ethics is not trying to think biology and ethics together, etc. So, and at that point, 10 years ago, I sort of took that for granted, the criticism on Van Rensselaer Potter. And for this book, I sort of started reading him again, and I actually really discovered very interesting things. Also that he uses Waddington, etc., etc. And Waddington is, of course, also influenced or has in contact with Whitehead. So there are all these connections also with Van Rensselaer Potter and with the birth of bioethics that I wasn't aware of. So during this research on this book, it became very interesting to see how these things all come back. Fritz Jaar, I only discovered after finishing the book, so I didn't mention him. And I also really would like to know more about this tension about the birth of the word bioethics. I have not done a real historical investigation on the origins of the word bioethics and on whether the words, as it was then popularized in Georgetown, etc., whether that was actually taken from Rensselaer Potter or from Fritz Jaar, etc., etc. What I do think that Fritz Jaar and Van Potter, as you say in the chat correctly, they have in common is that they really thought about it as an ethics of life, and that I think afterwards bioethics sort of lost a bit the life aspect. But maybe if you know more about this tension, I would be really interesting to hear more about that. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I don't know if Christina and Bartaku want to add anything.
Well, maybe I add something that is, a tangent, let's say, because before meeting Christina and before getting into, more seriously into bioethics and into the philosophy of this, I was fascinated with thinking myself about the ethics of my artworks, the ethics of working with other than human entities, the ethics of proposing or of using them, and I had a kind of simplistic way of seeing this, and I think this relates much more to this, to the bioethics of life than the bioethics as it is often understood now. So for me, actually, it was quite interesting to see that I felt a bit, okay, this is a very naive take on what bioethics is, but actually maybe before what we're describing now, how it's described now, it was actually that.
Well, thank you so much. Actually, linked to what you just mentioned about the ethics and the ethical and artistic part of it, we have another question, which introduces itself saying, like, Potter was inspired by also Leopold, who is credited with the term land ethic, in which he related to beauty to ethics. So, as an ethicist and artist, do you see Western philosophical separation of art as aesthetics and values as ethics somehow artificial or even dangerous? Is the revitalized concept of wisdom something of what we need?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. And indeed, I really enjoyed Potter's use of Aldo Leopold's land ethics to think together, to see medical ethics and environmental ethics as one part of one big endeavor. And I also do agree with you, although this is really thinking about art and the relation with ethics is something that is really very new to me and that I'm just starting to do. And I think that I want to, and the relation with creativity, etc., I want to do more in the future. But I think that you have a good point there, that the separation of art, aesthetics and value ethics, that this is a bit artificial. But on the other hand, I think also, especially when you think about environmental ethics and with beauty and the landscape, etc., we also have to think beyond Aldo Leopold and Potter to look at beauty and at the land in a non-naive way. We are 21st century. The wilderness idea, etc., has also a bit been challenged. So, but indeed, I think you got a point there, and I certainly agree with that. And I think you make a very good point about revitalizing the concept of wisdom, and that's also something that I haven't really thought much through. But recently, with thinking about non-Western philosophies, the idea that philosophy and knowledge and wisdom, they are something that go together. That what your concepts and how you use them is also creating something, and in creating something you need to do that wise. You need to do that with in the back of your hands, the realization that you're doing something. I think that is very important. But I think maybe revitalization of the concept of wisdom, but then in a how to say it, in a new way, in a way that can suit our current situation of what we're in now in the 21st century, maybe in dialogue with non-Western ideas surrounding wisdom and surrounding the place that we have in the universe, and that's wisdom. I think what are we humans? What are we to do here? And I think that's very very important. And I think bioethics could really learn a lot from that. Bioethics as an ethics of life, as an ethics of creation, etc. Thank you. I don't know, Christina or Bart, do you want to add something to that?
I think in the BioArt, Christina, me, our colleagues, we all work with life, and a few seconds later, death, and then perhaps in between something. So I think we are all quite aware, for example, when we work in labs where microbes are being frozen, brought back alive in seconds, we kill them again to perhaps extract some colors from them, and then we make a synthetic version of them. So we are very aware of the ethical questions, and we embody them, process them, and hopefully we can reach in that way to other ways of even asking questions, not even new questions, but different pathways of asking questions and different ethical frameworks and non-dualisms and extractivisms, perhaps avoiding them or not. And and rather again than answering a question here, I'm more interested, at least for me in my method, I am interested in, as Christine knows, in the future to use bioethics as a tool in a process of collaboration to limit the freedom, the possibilities, and in that way increase creativity. And hopefully that will lead to other kinds of understanding, and perhaps at some point we will dare to speak of wisdom.
Well, thank you so much to all of you. If someone else has any other questions, please put it on the chat. If not, I'll just, I will wait for it.
On the microbes, I read in the chat. That's
definitely, sorry. Yeah. No, I think that's completely fine. Yeah, well, thank you so much. I would like to really thank you for being here. This is a wonderful book, and I'm really excited to have this kind of event in which we can actually get to know all the process behind and not the thoughts that took to get there. So yeah, as OBP and as myself, I'm really, really thankful. I don't know if you have any closing statements that you would like to share before going.
Yeah, no, thank you all so much for being here, and also thank you the people here from my team who are here. I'm very happy, because everything that's in the book wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for all your very insightful remarks, etc. So I'm really grateful. I'm also very grateful for the interesting remarks here. And it was a difficult book to write. It was a fun book to write, and I was very afraid to actually submit it to some publisher. But now I'm happy. I'm happy that people are enjoying it. And I'm also really grateful for Christina and for Bart, because I think they made the book 1,000 times better by actually showing what's at stake and what can be done.
Yeah, I also would like to thank Christine very much, because it was a wonderful collaboration also. I think we had very nice moments where we had conversations where we selected and where we decided how to write it and how to fit it into the book. So I think it was a very smooth and very inspiring process. So I'm also very much looking forward to continue our collaboration. Yeah.
Nothing to add except big thanks.
Yeah, and also thank you, Laura, for all the good
My absolute pleasure. Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think I've said this a few times already, but this is an open access book, so anyone can read it or download it free online, as well as get a hard copy if they want, as well as ebook. So we have many options for you to choose. So yeah, again, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who has attended, and hopefully we'll see Kristian's new research soon. Oh yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make some publicity for open book publishers. It was my second book with open book publishers. It's brilliant. I mean, it's everything has been great. The reviews, the editing, etc. I couldn't wish for more, and it's open access. So I think that's important if you write a book about ethics, that people can actually read it without paying 200.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think open book publishers was one of my best discoveries over the last year. So
it's our absolute pleasure again. It's really our pleasure. And Towards an Ethic of Autism is also there free. So please click download, read it. It's all in there. And thank you so much. Thank you.